This episode is brought to you by Carvana. Carvana is in the business of driving you happy. And with the widest selection of used cars under $20,000, you're bound to find a car that'll put a smile on your face. They even offer customizable financing so you can plan your down and monthly payments. To shop thousands of affordable vehicles 100% online, download the app or visit Carvana.com. Availability may vary by market.
All right.
Tulpatastic.
Tulpa time in the city. You like that? Fucking awesome.
I really like how we can put tulpa in front of anything and it becomes more. It just becomes more.
It's always
just like
funny.
The tulpa itself, it embodies it with a new being, with a new energy.
It's always great. All right. Last episode, dear listeners, we talked about how to make thought forms and then how to make an astral body projection. Now, the reason we started with those, even though this is a series on tulpas, is because it's all part of kind of the same world of thinking that's going on at this time period. Tulpas, thought forms, all of this comes from theosophy, or really kind of, I guess, built into Western theosophy, or I guess Western thought through theosophy. There's no Eastern theosophy. Theosophy is kind of like Western religion borrowing lots of stuff from Eastern religions. So
imagine
that. The idea of the tulpa, though, really comes from a person named Alexandra David Neal. Now, she was a Belgian French explorer, spiritualist, anarchist, opera singer, writer, just total badass.
That's pretty
and
badass.
So she is best known for the work that she did from 1911 until 1925, and then again 1937 to 1946, where she visits Tibet and specifically meets with the Dalai Lama and gets to stay in Lhasa, Tibet, which is an area that at the time was completely forbidden to foreigners. And while there, she wrote books. While there, and then in other times of her life, she wrote a tremendous amount of works on the belief systems of Buddhism, of Tibetan Buddhism, and specifically how that relates to theosophy and magical practice.
And what year? Like what year was this again? Like what time frame?
So she's born in 1871, and she starts writing, or really starts working, kind of traveling through Tibet in 1911.
Oh my God, that's insane.
Yeah, she's a complete badass. She dies at the age of 100, and is like pretty famous in France, not so well known here in America, but a total badass, just amazing. And so this episode, we're going to get into some of her works and writings, and also how to make your own tulpa. Jake, roll the tape.
I wish I could do a good Martha Stewart at this point. Making a tulpa is a very relaxing and energetic pastime. My favorite tulpas are infused with lavender and a little bit of ginger.
So good, Marie.
That's not bad for right out of the gate, right? That's not too bad.
Pretty cool.
You know,
I think it's great.
If there's somebody out there in this day and age that could probably bring about a tulpa, I'm going to say Martha Stewart would be in the running. I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for that, but come on, people.
No, you know she's right there.
You know she's up there with that. Forget like any of your other mystical, no, it's Martha Stewart.
It's Martha Stewart. All right. So Alexandra is born in 1868. And so she is kind of it's interesting, right? So she is born to rich parents, essentially. So, and as she is part of kind of the world at the time of the late 1800s, France, and then as they move on to Belgium, she's kind of part of a bunch of different weird things. So she's into fasting and, reading the works of ascetic saints and doing their like flagellations on herself. She's a very interesting young person. And so at age 18, she was already studying under Madame Blavatsky in the Theosophical Society. So, and at the time, she's kind of part of this world of joining different sort of secret groups. Yeah, so she's a Freemason. She's part of anarchist groups at the time. She's just sort of getting into all the weird shit she possibly can, which is awesome.
Yeah, it's sort of a weird mix of stuff, right? Because I don't necessarily associate anarchy with Freemasons out of the gate, right?
Well, that's the thing. She's just sort of...
Yeah, she's just like dabbling. She's like, yeah, I'll do some of this, do a little of that.
She's just sort of checking out everything she possibly can.
And then I'm going to sing a little opera.
Well, it's crazy. She then becomes an opera singer, right? And then eventually she gets married, and anyways, she's already rich, right?
Yeah, because
so she doesn't have to, like...
We should back up by saying you only get to dabble like this, especially in the turn of the century, if you are really wealthy. Really, really wealthy. You do not have to fit, you don't have to work, and you don't have to really, you become eccentric, right? Like, I think if she had less money and was talking about anarchy, she would be locked up, right? She'd be put in an asylum. Honestly.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
in some regards.
The only time, listen, the only people who have time to, dabble in, weird shit like this, or... especially at this time, these are people that, in the 1800s, don't have to work, right? This is Theosophy, these sorts of practices of the time. This is the world of the idle rich.
Yes, but I do think there's something to be said that she's a female doing it, because even though she's very, very rich, she probably wouldn't normally conventionally be encouraged to do this. She'd be encouraged to know how to set a table and deal with her servants, right? And get married.
Well, it's interesting. So she gets married to a man named Philippe Neil de Saint-Sauveur when she's 36. And this is someone that she's been with basically for 5 years at that time, essentially, or 4 years at that time. And it's interesting. People today, they had a marriage that was sort of a non-conventional-ish marriage, in that he sort of was her patron of all the weird shit she was into. Yeah, that's what was thought at the time. But the thing is that she was already super wealthy, right? So they just had an unconventional kind of marriage,
She was 36 when they got married, which is, again, turn of the century. That is ancient for turn of the century.
Well, it's crazy, right? So she never had kids. They got married super duper late, and they got married, and then she fucked off to Tibet for 14 years. So yeah, it's a super interesting story. Again, very, very interesting that, again, it seems they just kind of got married because they loved and respected each other, but it was sort of a weird, again, not a conventional marriage at the time, to say the least.
That's pretty cool. And
so she goes to India first in 1912. So she leaves in 1911, goes to India in 1912. She is there to kind of further study Buddhism and these other sorts of kind of Eastern religious ideas. And as she kind of works her way up, talking to these people and everything else, she meets the 13th Dalai Lama while they're in exile, which is super uncommon. You can imagine for a Westerner to have this kind of audience at the time.
A Western woman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so they actually kind of became pen pals almost. So she spoke to him and asked him about Buddhism, and she knew a lot, right? She knew a lot of things that he didn't expect her to know and everything else. And so they started a correspondence where essentially she asked him for answers to questions, and he said, "I will write your answers down. I'm gonna give you the answers in writing." Yeah. And so some of the stuff that he writes to her, it's quite interesting, right? So,
So can I ask you a quick question?
sure.
You're like, yeah, why not?
Just do it. Just give me the question.
What language was she speaking to him when they met?
So
'Cause
at
she's
the
French,
time,
right?
she's speaking English.
She's speaking English and he's speaking English.
Yes. It's
'Cause
kind of through a translator.
Through a translator. Okay.
And
And then when he's writing to her,
well, he tells her that she should, he tells her that she should learn Tibetan, which she does.
oh,
Yeah. Yeah. Badass. It's like crazy,
dang.
right?
Yeah, no, that's because I'm just thinking like, again, like she's French. I can't imagine that he knows French, but they know some English, right? And you're right. I've totally forgot that they would probably have a translator, but for the written language, he would be writing in Tibet. Like, what is the Tibet written language called?
I believe it's Tibetan.
Wow, that's tough.
Yeah. It's intense, right? So she, again, this is a very smart woman we're talking about.
Yeah,
like, this is not somebody who's just like on, just fucking having a great time in Tibet. Like, this is
She's
a
going
very
glamping in
smart
Tibet.
person. Yeah, she's not glamping in Tibet, right?
No, I mean that's pretty tough.
So an important point here too, right? She doesn't meet the Dalai Lama actually in Tibet. She meets him in India.
Yes.
And then so she's in a town.
He's in exile. Yeah.
Yeah, so she's in a town called Kalimpong. So she travels to India in 1911. Now, this is the second time she's in India, but she travels there specifically this time to study Buddhism. And so she starts off by getting to the royal monastery of Sikkim. Now, this is in the northeastern part of India. It borders Tibet, and it's a very spiritual place for Buddhism, especially Tibetan, kind of Indian Tibetan Buddhism.
Doesn't get a lot of tourism.
No. Well, I mean, maybe today it does, but at the time it did not.
But at the time,
turn of the century, it did not.
1900s, no.
And so she's moving around between Buddhist monasteries, and at the time she befriends Maharaj Kumar, or the Crown Prince Sidkong Tulku Namgyal, who is the son of the Maharaja of what would become the state of India, or rather a state of India, I should say. And so as she's traveling around, she ends up meeting a young man who's 15 named Afur Yongdon, who she ends up taking on as her adopted son, and who becomes kind of her translator throughout the rest of her journeys. And so, as she's traveling around, the Maharaj that she met decides to introduce her to his father. And so, they go and they talk, and she's telling him about, religious reformation and political reformation and all this other interesting stuff. And, she becomes kind of intertwined in the politics of this part of India, right? This kind of northeastern province of India, I should say.
Which again, like, this is sort of the royal family of the Maharaja and they would be very insular. Like, it's not like anyone, I think, could probably just show up, right, and be, and gain their trust. That's the thing that kind of is amazing to me as well, is it's like that she goes to these situations, and maybe her wealth, and again, somehow her wealth and her Westernness and her affluence helps, but she's successfully kind of co-opted into this other culture.
Yeah, it's more just her genuine interest and eagerness, I think. She's just like, I really want to learn. And they're like, cool, let's teach you, Yeah. So, the Maharaja ends up leaving with her, the Lama Kazi Dawa Samduk, who becomes, again, one of her kind of guides, and the person who teaches her Tibetan. And this person becomes really important in kind of modern religious thought because they're the first translator of Tibetan Buddhist works into English. So it's quite interesting, and again plays an important role in the politics of this time period, right? Because he's the interpreter, right? He's the person who can go between English and the local languages that are being spoken at this time, in kind of the early 1900s. So they travel together to a town called Kalimpong, where she ends up meeting the 13th Dalai Lama, who is currently in exile from Tibet. And so while there, they kind of become friends, which is amazing. So
She becomes buddies with the Dalai Lama.
yeah. So again, it's being
something that only Richard Gere has accomplished in our lifetime. No,
it's crazy. Well, it's crazy, right? So she's translating, or the works that she's talking about are being translated back and forth. And the Dalai Lama tells her, well, listen, you should learn Tibetan, keep learning Tibetan so you can talk in the original language, but also says, questions you ask me, if you want them for posterity, I'll write them down. So then you'll have them written so you can study them later when you're not here. And she takes him up on that offer, which is absolutely fascinating. So now she's kind of getting, what's the word? She's getting more bold, I guess I'd say. Mm-hmm. Right? So she's like, all right, awesome. So she moves to a town called Lachin, which again, this is all in India, right?
Right.
And this is still in Sikkim, that Indian state that the Maharaja controls, that she's friends with.
Yes.
And so while there, again, she's studying Buddhism. And this is where she learns the ability to produce body heat by mobilizing her internal energy, right? A technique called Tummo. Right. And she goes into a state to do this called Sam, right? Which is basically the idea of like, you go into retreat without seeing anybody for days at a time and just meditate.
And this is the thing where you can raise your internal body temperature.
Yes.
They've proven this though, right?
Yeah. It's crazy. Yeah.
I mean, that's actually been scientifically proven.
Yeah. Like they show that
temperature.
Yes.
Of monks that have done this, which is,
yeah.
And then you see them, all these little old men, like barefoot running around in the Himalayan snow. And you're like, that's insane.
Yeah. It's crazy. Right. So, yeah, absolutely crazy.
Nuts. That's like the amount of self, if you just think about like your body and how much you have to self-regulate, what control you would have over your physical self through your mental being is really that is really impressive. So,
and they're able to raise their internal temperature. Like it's significant too. It's not a small increase. It's like between 1 to 7 degrees Celsius. You can raise your internal temperature. It's crazy. And again, it's been studied consistently.
Yeah.
So, very, very interesting. So again, being able to practice this, she's given honor, right? She's given a special religious name. So her name is Yeshe Tom, which means lamp of wisdom, which is very useful because, and this is given to her by the Gamsham of Lachin, so the town that they're in, right? And so this is the superior, kind of the head of the town's monastery. And so with this name of Yeshe Tome, she's known by all Buddhist authorities, right? It's like if a Roman Catholic priest said that you were a priest, right? Or a deacon or something. Yeah.
Right. Yes.
So, again, she's traveling all around India at this time in this region called Sikkim, and the Maharaja's dad, the Maharaja, passes away in 1914. And so the son, Sidkyong, the Maharaj, takes over. And so again, she's told him all about religious reform and political reform. And so, all this stuff is happening. And so she is an important part of his sort of political life, but also an important part of his personal life. She becomes his marriage counselor, which is crazy,
That's just so strange.
It's
and
very
interesting,
strange.
like that somebody would listen. Again, like this person has such influence over the royal family that they allow that.
She's like a less smelly Rasputin.
She's like a less smelly, less nefarious sounding Rasputin.
Yeah.
Depending on where you are in the political structure, I'm sure that she probably wasn't viewed very favorably by some of the other, standing court, right?
Well, what ends up happening is Sid Kyung, so the new Maharaja, dies very suddenly.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So his father dies in February,
Uh-huh.
and he is dead by November.
Dang.
And so she believes that he was probably poisoned, because of his, kind of newfangled political and religious beliefs. Yeah. And so she's like, all right, well,
good time for me to leave.
Time to get out of Dodge.
Yeah.
So she leaves for Tibet. Yeah. And so she leaves for Tibet now, but with Yongdin again, her kind of Robin, if she's Batman, and a monk who goes with them.
Yeah.
And so they travel to close by religious monasteries, and again, sort of
just traveling the land.
Yeah, exactly. Sort of learning more and more as she can. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when she comes back, though, to Sikkim, this area that she'd been staying in India, right, where the Maharaja lived and everything else, she is told by the British colonial authorities that, listen, you ignored the ban on entering Tibet. We have to deport you.
She's out.
Right?
She's out. Mm-hmm.
And
it
so
took them a while to get back. Two things of note. One, again, that she's traveling and doing all of this herself, without the aid of an embassy or kind of anything besides a translator, which, all of the wealth in the world isn't going to save you of anything. And two, but, it took them quite a while for the colonial British, like their guards or whatever, or authorities to be able to find her.
Yeah.
Or identify her and kick her back out.
And so the other thing to keep in mind here too, like, which again, we don't really learn about this sort of modern world history in America. This is like a super tumultuous time for this entire region of the world.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So, the Qing dynasty falls in 1911, which is, just crazy. Right? It's the ruling part of China in the region from the 1720s until 1911. Yeah. So it's a huge difference. So Tibet at this time declares recognition and independence from China. They're working.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, the British are talking between them. The Russians, like, everyone in the world is like, oh crap, we gotta start thinking about this, right? So it's a very, very complicated time.
Yes.
So she's told, get the hell out of here, you crazy lady. So she goes to, and again, it's now, this is now 1916, 1917. So she can't go back to Europe because of World War I.
Yeah.
So she travels to India, to Japan, to China, Korea. She just travels all over the region, basically. And finally, in 1924, decides, all right, well, listen, here's what we're going to do. We are going to dress up as a beggar monk. All right? We're going to dress up as a beggar monk, and we are going to sneak into Lhasa in Tibet. Okay. Lhasa is known as the place of the gods in Tibet.
The holy city.
Yes, the holy city. It is really kind of the center of Tibetan Buddhism, and it's an exceptionally important place. Foreigners are not allowed there. She's like, fuck it. Look, I'm dressed for it. Let's go. Yeah. And so she goes to what's known as the Forbidden City at the time. Yeah.
Right.
And the way she decides to try to get in is she's like, all right, well, I'm dressed as a monk. I'm going to pretend to be a pilgrim who's coming to celebrate the Monlam Prayer Festival, which is a it's a religious festival. It's the most important one in Tibet, where thousands of monks go to the Joghang Temple in Lhasa and sort of pray, do rituals, chant.
It's like a pilgrimage.
You know, it's a huge pilgrimage and a huge religious time.
Yeah. So she's just going to blend in.
Yeah, so she's there. She's visiting holy monasteries and areas and things. No one said that she was allowed to come in. No one acknowledged her, really. Again, she knew the Dalai Lama at the time. They were buddies. But she did not tell him she was there because, again, no way she would have been allowed to go.
Right. But I mean, yeah, that makes sense.
And so eventually, they figured out that it was her. And the reason they figured out it was her was because she
wanted posters. No,
she washed herself every day. She took a bath in the river every day. And so she's found out, and people bring reports of her to the governor of Lhasa at the time.
All right. And it's a woman, too.
Yeah,
it's so her bathing. Yeah.
So her and Yongdon are like, we got to get out of here.
Yeah,
so they leave. They run.
Oh, my God.
And so they head to another town. And again, they're just sort of now traveling around as paupers. They have no money. They're just sort of traveling around. And she sort of just moves around and is able to get around because of some money that she borrows, and ends up traveling back to Europe. And when she returns to Europe, her sort of stories and lessons and stuff make her super cool and popular. Yes.
Because this is when? This is
1925 when she gets back.
1925. Right. Which is, again, sort of the same, like in Europe, the same time as, I want to say Carter and sort of the Egypt craze, right?
Yep.
So there's all this air quoting, Orientalism, right? Becomes sort of like the mystic, the other. It is the colonial pastiche on a different culture. So I'm sure, like, besides her having a genuine understanding of knowledge in it, there's all this sort of hyped pop culture about it.
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting, right? So when she gets back, she starts writing. And she writes a whole lot of books in her lifetime, but the most famous is Magicians and Mystics in Tibet, which we're going to read some quotes of as we get to the next section here. But basically, now at this point, she's sort of, she came back. She's super duper famous. Decides in 1937, after writing all these books and kind of, creating her house, right, which she called the Fortress of Meditation, which is the very first, the first Tibetan Buddhist shrine in France. According to some, she decides, all right, I'm going back to China and Tibet. So 1937, she's 69 years old.
Jesus.
She goes back to China with Yongdon. And she's there, kind of hanging out for 5 years. She finds out her husband's dead in 1941, decides that sucks, gonna stay here for another couple years. Ends up going back to France in 1946 at the age of 78, and again continues writing, and becomes, just kind of becomes a local famous mystic and spiritualist. And this is where she'll live until she passes away at the age of 100 in 1969.
1969.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Isn't that crazy?
That is so crazy. I mean, she's basically seen an entire evolution, like 2 wars, and then the rise of the Communist Party in, like, the rise of Mao in China.
Yeah.
Right? And the whole conflict they have with trying to reclaim Tibet. She's seen Gandhi, right? Trying to unify Pakistan and India. Like, she's lived through this entire period and been kind of in proximity to it this entire time.
It's absolutely fascinating. And again, I don't think, like, we wouldn't have Goop if it wasn't for if it wasn't for her. You know,
We wouldn't have Goop if it
we
was.
honestly, we wouldn't have the vast majority of modern kind of like theosophy, religious spiritualism, whatever. Like, she is sort of the link, you know, she really is. Like, she's, I would argue, almost a more important figure than Blavatsky in this sort of world.
I would like to just remind our viewers to, you know, send your comments to Chris. Not to me about the Goop comment.
All right. So why are we talking about her though? Right? Obviously, so this lady had a cool ass life, right? Super badass. Why are we talking about her? She is the person that brings the concept of the tulpa to the West. And this first happens in her book, Magicians and Mystics, in chapter 3, page 115. And so this is a quote from that. She goes, quote, "As I have related it in the first chapter of the present book, I met the Dalai Lama in 1912 when he was living in the Himalayas and asked him several questions regarding Lama's doctrine, to which he first answered orally. Afterwards, in order to avoid misunderstandings, he told me to write a list of new questions on the points which still appeared to me obscure. To these, he gave written answers. The present quotation is taken from the document with which the Dalai Lama favored me. A bodhisattva, a being who has attained the high degree of spiritual perfection immediately below that of a Buddha, is the basis of countless magic forms. By the power generated in a state of perfect concentration of mind, he may, at one and the same time, show a phantom, tulpa, written sprulpa, which is hilarious, of himself in thousand millions of worlds. He may create not only human forms, but any forms he chooses, even those of inanimated objects such as hills, enclosures, houses, forests, roads, bridges, etc. He may produce atmospheric phenomena as well as the thirst-quenching beverage of immortality." And then she has an aside here, "The later expression I have been advised to take in both a literal and symbolic sense. In fact," reads the conclusion, "there is no limit to his power of phantom creation." So she goes on to say, "The theory sanctioned in these lines by the highest authority of official Lamaism is identical without expounded in the Mahayanist literature, where it is said that an accomplished bodhisattva is capable of effecting 10 kinds of magic creations. The power of producing magic formations, tulkus, or less lasting and materialized tulpas, does not, however, belong exclusively to such mystic exalted beings. Any human being, divine or demoniac being, may be possessed of it. The only difference comes from the degree of power, and this depends on the strength of the concentration and the quality of the mind itself." End quote. Now, she gets deeper into this. She talks about accounts of seeing tulpas or visualization creatures that are created. So here are some of these accounts. "In connection with this kind of visualization or thought form creation, I may relate a few phenomena which I have witnessed myself. 1. The servant Wang Du. A young Tibetan who was in my service went to see his family. I had granted him 3 weeks' leave, after which he was to purchase a food supply, engage porters to carry the loads across the hills, and come back with a caravan. Most likely the fellow had a good time with his people. 2 months elapsed, and still he did not return. I thought he had definitely left me. Then I saw him one night in a dream. He arrived at my place clad in a somewhat unusual fashion, wearing a sun hat of a foreign shape. He had never worn such a hat. The next morning, one of my servants came to me in haste. Wang Du has come back, he told me. I have just seen him down the hill. The coincidence was strange. I went out of my room to look at the traveler. The place where I stood dominated a valley. I distinctly saw Wang Du. He was dressed exactly as I'd seen him in my dream. He was alone and walking slowly up the path that wound up the hill slope. I remarked that he had no luggage with him, and the servant who was next to me answered, Wang Du has walked ahead, the load carriers must be following. We both continued to observe the man. He reached a small shorten, or stupa, walked behind it, and did not reappear. The base of this shorten was a cube built in stone, less than 3 feet high, and from its needle-shaped top to the ground, the small monument was no more than 7 feet high. There was no cavity in it. Moreover, the shorten was completely isolated. There were neither houses nor trees, nor undulations, nor anything that could provide a hiding in the vicinity. My servant and I believed that Wang Du was resting for a while under the shade of the shorten. But as time went by without his reappearing, I inspected the ground round the monument with my field glasses, but discovered nobody. Very much puzzled, I sent 2 of my servants to search for the boy. I followed their movements with the glasses, but no trace was to be found of Wang Du, nor of anybody else. That same day, a little before dusk, the young man appeared in the valley with his caravan. He wore the very same dress and the foreign sun hat which I had seen in my dream and in the morning vision. Without giving him or the load carriers time to speak with my servants and hear about the phenomena, I immediately questioned them. From their answers, I learned that all of them had spent the previous night in a place too far distant from my dwelling for anyone to reach the latter in the morning. It was also clearly stated that Wang Du had continually walked with the party. During the following weeks, I was able to verify the accuracy of the men's declarations by inquiring about the time of the caravan's departure. At the few last stages where the porters were changed, it was proved that they had all spoken the truth and had left the last stage together with Wang Du, as they said. Now, this is a case where the body of the person seems to be traveling, or the soul, I guess, the thought form travels before the person. Now, this we've talked about in previous episodes. The real weirdest one, though, is the following. So this is the painter. A Tibetan painter, a fervent worshiper of the wrathful deities, who took a particular delight in drawing their terrible forms, came one afternoon to pay me a visit. I noticed behind him the somewhat nebulous shape of one of the fantastic beings which often appeared in his paintings. I made a startled gesture, and the astonished artist took a few steps towards me, asking what was the matter. I noticed that the phantom did not follow him, and quickly thrusting my visitor aside, I walked to the apparition with one arm stretched in front of me. My hand reached the foggy form. I felt as if touching a soft object whose substance gave way under the slight push, and the vision vanished. The painter confessed in answer to my questions that he had been performing a dubthab rite during the last few weeks, calling on the deity whose form I had dimly perceived, and that very day he had worked the whole morning on a painting of the same deity. In fact, the Tibetan's thoughts were entirely concentrated on the deity whose help he wished to secure for a rather mischievous undertaking. He himself had not seen the phantom. In these cases, the phenomena was produced without the conscious cooperation of its author. Or, as a mystic Lama remarked, Wang Du and the painter could hardly be termed the authors of the phenomena. They were but one cause, maybe the principal one, amongst the various causes which had brought them about. So. Now, here's the thing. She claims that she has created a tulpa.
Really?
The tulpa she claims to have created is what she called the fat monk. The fat and jolly monk.
Well, at least it's happy and it's not some smoke form.
Well, eventually what happened is the thing she created took its own life. Not took its own life, like it didn't kill itself, but I mean, it took its own consciousness, I guess. It started bothering her. It started just being everywhere. It started just annoying the shit out of her, essentially.
Careful what you wish for.
And so she claims that she then disintegrates it. She causes it to go away. She basically banishes it away.
That's a little cold.
Now,
isn't it? Again, same, probably around the same period as Frankenstein, right?
Yeah, same time as Frankenstein, same time as these sort of stories are happening, right? It's very interesting. So she claims now that you can create these things consciously. And she claims that the monks do this, right? So she says that the monks create these protective phantoms who come and help people. They call them yidams, right? Now, what they're doing is they're doing a ritual called a tub-thub, right? Which is basically like a conjuring ritual is what they talk about, right? So it's an invocation itself. And people today do these. People today try to get tulpas. And that's what we're going to get into after the break.
Hi, I'm Brendan Slocum. I'm going to tell you how music can save your life, what it can do for you, and what it has done for me and my guests.
It's such a universal language. You can go any place in the world, and I love that.
Hey, if you got soul, you got soul. I don't care what your color is.
I think music needs to be something that helps us to know what we all have in common.
How music can save your life. Find it wherever you listen to podcasts.
And we're back. All right. So how do you create a tulpa then? Right. So we've already heard about it. Yeah. What you have to do. So first off, you obviously have to concentrate on the object that you want to create. Yeah.
Yes.
So you have to concentrate on it. You have to make it real. And so if you read theosophical literature, what they talk about is the ability of visualization. And visualization isn't just about seeing something in your mind's eye, although it's kind of that, right? It's seeing it, but then being able to make yourself sense like the physical, if you visualized a rock, you can feel the rock in your hands. You can move it around.
Right.
You can taste it. You can taste the kind of metallic or earthy flavor of it. You can smell it. You can hear it clack on other rocks. Right.
It has context. Yeah.
Really has to
volume.
Have solid volume to the thought itself.
Yeah.
And so this is actually from WikiHow on how to create a tulpa. So one, planning.
Here's the thing. Planning. Here's the thing. We are not endorsing that our listeners go out and Google how to make a tulpa. All right, we're just gonna put that out there for our future legal episode, episodes. Like this isn't okay. I'm sorry, please.
So
step one.
So step one is plan it out, right? So again, this is
Don't
like
go half-assed into tulping.
No. So this is like you plan its appearance, you plan its personality, you plan everything about it, right? So you build this character in your mind.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Then you begin visualization. So you meditate and concentrate. Imagine what they look like. Imagine them next to you. Imagine, again, the smell, the feel. Imagine them moving. Imagine them walking with you, right? All of these other things, right? To visualize how it creates or how it would exist. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, create a place for the tulpa to exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, an imaginary world, the world around you, whatever, but someplace where the tulpa exists with you.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Where he's like, bullshit.
No, I just okay. I'm still with you. I'm still with you.
And then the next part is once you've created them, start talking to them. Ask them to speak back to you, right? Give them a voice. Let them speak to you and converse with them. And again, it's an imaginary friend.
It's
right?
an imaginary friend. Yes. Yes.
And finally, the last step here is checking its sentience.
Oh.
So,
is that like what, step 5?
That's step 4.
Oh, really? There's only 4 easy steps?
Well, it's a 5 step. The last step is moving it into reality.
Oh, okay. So
and then step 6, steps. I assume, is the horror.
Yeah, run like hell. Yeah.
So, you are asking them to do things that you yourself maybe don't have control over. Right? So you ask them a question to something that you wouldn't expect a certain answer to, or take note of cases where it does something maybe you didn't want it to do, or
definitely take note of that.
Whatever, right?
Yeah.
And then finally, it
brings back the liver of your enemies.
Finally, it is moving it into reality with you, right? So walk with it, bring it with you in the car, watch a movie, right? Have a date, like, right? So you're making it real again.
Aye. Okay.
And of course, the final one is visit the tulpa forums.
Visit the tulpa forum
because we live in hell world.
Oh my God. There's got to be a subreddit on this, right?
I'm sure there is.
Oh dear.
Now, again, the part of the kind of visualization of the invocation that we talked about before, that can be a way of helping the visualization, maybe, right? That would kind of make sense. And again, part of the idea of a tulpa is that it can be created by other people as well, right? So if we think about like famous tulpas, right?
Yeah.
A famous tulpa or a famous version of a tulpa that I think a lot of people look at is like Slender Man, right?
Yeah.
So Slender Man is this character that was created for an internet meme, right? It was created on Something Awful by Eric Knudsen, right? With these kind of cool, these kind of scary looking pictures or whatever. And it now has sort of not a mind of its own, but a life of its own, right? It's moved past what Eric originally created for it. And
right.
People are killing, there's the case of the stabbing in Waukesha, Wisconsin, right?
Yeah.
Where two girls, 12-year-old girls, thought that they would be able to basically give their friend to Slender Man to make him take them to his house or whatever.
Yeah, to his mansion or something. Yes.
So
yes.
It's interesting, right? It's this sort of idea that these things can have their own life outside of you. And if that's what it is, the internet helps that tremendously.
Yeah. Now that's interesting because it's like the creepypasta stories of Candle Cove. Like Candle Cove is definitely a kind of almost like a tulpa-like experience. Like you are imagining something or you're having a collective experience and you're bringing through your collective imagining of it, it begins to have a life of its own with other stories or with other, like it starts to spin off almost.
Yeah.
That's
Now
internet.
And now because it's the internet, one of the
course.
things people use tulpas for is banging them. Now, this is from an article from the all.com by Rachel Monroe. All right. And I'm going to read this because, Maria, this is important.
This is exhausting. I know you know it was going to come to this, right? Like this is why we can't have nice things.
Listen, it was always going to come to this. To access the Tulpas Gone Wild board subreddit, you have to click a button certifying that you're over 18. Then you'll find a dozen or so threads with headlines like "feeling a bit frisky tonight," smiley face, and "up for a little mischief," and I'm not even going to say this one because it's too dirty for our podcast. All of which are marked not safe for work, and all of which link to images that are not only eminently safe for work, but so dull that they look as though they might have been taken by mistake. A beige couch, its cushion slightly askew, the upper corner of a white ceiling. This is the world of the 21st century tulpa, an empty room, a digital camera, and online forum. Tulpas started cropping up as a popular topic of conversation on 4chan around 2009. The growing community was eventually trolled out of 4chan. Over the next few years, they moved on to scores of message boards, Tumblrs, and blogs. Currently, the Tulpa forum on Reddit, the central online gathering place for people engaged in creating intelligent companions imagined into existence, boasts nearly 7,000 subscribers, although far fewer active posters. Tulpa creation as practiced on the internet would likely be unrecognizable to Tibetan mystics who conceived of tulpas as magically created manifestations. Redditors creating tulpas don't think of themselves as shamans engaged in a metaphysical edge play. They tend to frame the practice as an exploration of human cognition, relying on an odd contemporary blend of mindfulness practice, folk neuroscience, and role-playing game character creation. There are a number of tulpa creation FAQs out there offering practical, even strict advice. You should spend at least 20 hours of just sitting down and visualizing your tulpa perfectly in your head. The very minimum you should be forcing for it one period is 40 minutes. Also, don't force for longer than 3 hours at a time, or else you will get horrific headaches. Forcing a tulpa, to use the preferred verb of contemporary online tulpamancers, is not for the wishy-washy. Getting your tulpa to
the employed.
Getting your tulpa to the point of imposition, that is where she appears as a fully 3D creature perceivable by all five senses and capable of independent thought and action, can take months of daily practice. Judging from Reddit's Tulpa Art Tuesdays, human tulpas tend to look right out of an anime casting call. All big, wet eyes, rainbow-colored hair, and dainty noses. Non-human tulpas include flirty squirrels, eyeless reptilians, and yes, plenty of ponies. The brony and tulpa communities overlap. Around 2012, after the tulpamancers were trolled off the main 4chan boards, they found refuge in MLP, the My Little Pony board. Tulpa FAQs recommend spending 3 to 10 hours concentrating on your tulpa's smell alone, and 5 to 10 hours sitting quietly, picturing its particular gait and gestures.
Contribute to your society. Become a viable person.
Listen,
in the
Normie,
world.
don't tell me what to do. After 2 months of daily
Get out of your
practice,
mom's basement.
After 2 months of daily practice, your tulpa might begin to show After 2 months of daily practice, your tulpa might begin to show faint signs of independence. First communicating with you through flashes of shared emotion, then parroting your words back to you, and finally, hopefully, saying something on its own. I did not get an emotional response until I hit around 50 hours in, so really, don't hold your breath, one prolific poster notes.
Who's making money off of this? This is only existing if someone's making money off of this, which is the true tulpa. Sure, pornography sounds like a good idea. There's going to be a huge portion of that. Really, where the tulpa begins to take shape is somebody is monetizing this.
Well, this is how it ends. Ready?
Okay.
So,
of course I am.
Even after achieving sentience, tulpas must be tended or else they'll wither away, Tamagotchi-like, from lack of attention. The forums are full of suggestions for fun tulpa host activities to sustain and deepen their connection. Some sound dull, addition flashcards. Some seem pulled from a romantic comedy dating montage, cook dinner together, feed ducks at a pond, and some are outright bizarre. Lie down, get a stuffed animal with arms, sorry, no snakes, and set it on your chest with its arms facing you, and ask your tulpa to control the arms through possessing your hands. Then they can slap you like they've always wanted to. Sorry, no snakes, Marie. Some tulpas even post on Reddit, presumably through the bodies of their hosts, offering insider tips to new users. When I was younger, the host exposed us both to new experiences. We did not stay cooped up in his house, but went exploring on his days off from work. Then I could react to new things alongside him.
Days off from work. Air quote. Okay, I have so much to say about this that I'm just not going to.
Well, all right. So look, could you make a tulpa to bang? Yes, you could. Should you? Probably not.
Well, again, I mean, you kind of have to ask, what is the purpose of something, right? Like, which is really what you're doing with the tulpa is you're giving purpose, form. If it is just a circle jerk and that thing doesn't have any sentience or doesn't show it, maybe teach it a few words, give it some basic edition flashcards. It's sort of like, are you kidding me? So really, you could just probably buy a blow up doll for that.
Well, I mean, sure. Yeah. But I mean,
but again, that would require money, so you'd probably still have to have a job. I love how that poster said when they were at work, when they got there. So it made it sound like it was, sure, I'm well rounded. I have a job.
You have to remember, the people of 2014 did not have the erotic tool sets at their disposal we do today, right? So it's a bit harder to say. Well, no, honestly, seriously, I think the most interesting thing about this concept of a tulpa is the idea that it's like a community itself can give something form.
Yes.
So
something purpose.
If you think about things like gods and goddesses from ancient history, or even like family, like animal spirits that watch over your family, or ancestor worship or whatever, it kind of, all of it or sort Pokemon. Of fits in.
Yes.
Or Pokemon, right?
Yes.
All of it kind of fits in, and it's really interesting, right? There's an infamous person named Chris Chan who is currently in jail for doing some horrific things, and there's sort of real bad person, and people did horrible things to them, so it's not, it's a whole shit, right? It's like literally looking into the face of hell and realizing that we're in it, and but one of the things that this person ends up sort of believing or talking about is the idea that fictional characters exist in their own universe. And it's not that far off from tulpas. It's not that far off from this sort of concept.
No, it's not. It's not.
These fictional beings can exist. And I think it's one of those fascinating cases where if you look at, like, say, all the works of Neil Gaiman.
Oh, yeah.
So the Sandman is coming out soon on HBO or wherever the hell Sandman's coming out. The comics are amazing. The books of magic that they wrote, that work is based on that same kind of premise, that all of the mystical creatures exist out there. They just all exist kind of on their own planes. And it's common in comic books too, right? It's in Marvel, it's in DC, it's in a lot of these different places. And so I think it's just fascinating to think, like, we think about these ideas of tulpas or theosophy or whatever as being these very old ideas, right? This badass lady died in 1969. Her ideas are everywhere around us.
That's very true.
We're not as scientific as we think we are as a society. We're not as rational as we think we are as a society. Whether that's good or bad.
I would agree with that. And I think if there is a way to make it into porn or make it into money, we double down.
It is pretty funny, though, that
unfortunately, like, we never do things out of the sort of, like, the goodness of our heart gets us so far, and then, you know, really, again, like, what really drives things forward is sort of more base urges. Well, it's interesting, right? Because one of the things that came up, so good friend of the show, Ryan Sprague, on Somewhere in the Skies, which is his podcast on kind of ufology and UFOs. He on Twitter brought up an idea that actually we were going to talk about here on the show. Skinwalker Ranch. Now, Skinwalker Ranch is often given as a concept of a tulpa, or an existence or version of a tulpa in the modern age. Yes. Or dragon. Dragon might be a tulpa. He dresses in black and has a sidearm. Why? What is he going to shoot? What is he going to shoot? He's going to shoot the ghosts or whatever. It's not clear. Is he going to shoot the ghosts? He's going to shoot at a UFO. It's going to bounce off the... What is it? Like, is it even loaded? He's always wearing black. I'm worried about his balance. He always looks concerned about stuff, too. All right. Sorry. So Skinwalker Ranch, right? If you look at the history of sort of the ranch itself, there are no reports that anything weird was happening on the ranch before the people that sold it to Bigelow. True. Yes. And so, sorry, I had to cough there. No, that's okay. And so, one theory that's kind of out there is the ranch itself is infested with tulpas created by all of the people going there looking for something with ill intent. I could see that. I mean, that's sort of the same idea that Shirley Jackson used for The Haunting of Hill House. Yes, exactly. Right? Or for The Little Stranger, which is about, like, kind of similar, right? Like, a haunting is a physical manifestation of a concentrated effort from either an individual or a group. Yes. But you are in this closed system that acts as a battery for it. And, you know, I think a little bit about, frankly, a little bit almost about punishment, right? And karma. Mm-hmm. What better punishment is there for avarice, for greed, to buy a house or a place that you think is going to make you riches? Right? It's going to make you famous. It's going to let you prove all of those stupid science assholes wrong. Yeah. And then have you create a paranormal experience that is based off of that hate and that desire for riches and fame and whatever. Yes. That then tricks you constantly. Constantly eludes you. That's a very interesting take on it. I hope that that's true. Me too. Fuck those guys. I hope that is very much so the case. That's pretty good. I like that. Interesting, right? Yes, that is interesting. Dear listeners, whatever you do, just go outside. Go outside. Get some fresh air, man. Fresh air. Go for a walk. You don't need to make a tulpa. Make real friends. It's going to be okay. We'll be your friends. Just message us. We're your friends, and we're real. Last time I checked, I'm not the physical manifestation of anybody's collective imagination that I know of. Honestly, I've never listened back to an episode, so I could be talking to myself right now. Jake might just be pulling my fucking leg. He's like, this idiot pays me to edit these episodes. It's just him talking to himself like an asshole. I don't know. You can be fake, Marie. Oh, don't prove him. Don't prove him right or wrong, Jake. Dear listeners, we love you. Thank you for listening to the Mad Scientist Podcast. We'll be back next time.
Thank you again, dear listeners, for listening to the Mad Scientist podcast. I have been your host, Chris Cogswell, joined by my co-host,
Marie Mayhew.
If you'd like to contact the show, please send us an email at themadscientistpodcast@gmail.com. That's all one word. You can also follow us on Twitter at Mad Scientist Pod or at Team Giant Squid for Marie. And of course, you can see us on Facebook, on Instagram, and all over the internet as the Mad Scientist Podcast. And again, our logo is the one with the pumpkin head, so it's easy to see.
Mm-hmm.
If you've enjoyed the show tonight, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where the money that you give to us will help us to promote this show further, to make it better, and just to spend more time making it.
Yes, we love doing that.
We do love doing that. Our logo was designed by Carrie Shaheen. Our web design is done by Desdemona Howard.
Woohoo!
And our sound design is done by Jake Cardinal. Thanks again for listening.
Thank you. This has been a Damn It Chippy production.
Hi, I'm Brendan Slocum. I'm going to tell you how music can save your life, what it can do for you, and what it has done for me and my guests.
It's such a universal language. You can go any place in the world, and I love that.
Hey, if you got soul, you got soul. I don't care what your color is.
I think music needs to be something that helps us to know what we all have in common.
How music can save your life. Find it wherever you listen to podcasts.